that. That's the only other item. Any other comments or regarding the meeting minutes? If none, then all in favor of accepting the meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the meeting minutes are approved. First item up for tonight on our agenda is a public hearing. It's item number 1, case number 22033, Crossroads Distribution Center North 6 LLC rezoning with conditions request. I have a motion to approve the public hearing.
Mr. Chair, I move to open the public hearing for item number 1.
All right, do I have support?
Support.
Motion by Commissioner Jar, support by Commissioner Cullen. All in favor to open the any comments or discussion regarding the motion? So we have none. All in favor to open the public hearing, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the public hearing is open. All right, if anybody has any comments or questions or wish to discuss this agenda item, if you'd step up to the podium. And we were to address some of the other issues. We'll go through the plan in more detail as we get into our new business, but this is going to be just for comments regarding this item from the public. Director Bauer?
Mr. Chair, I would just mention that this is, again, as the chair said, this is usually the opportunity for neighbors and people in the audience who are curious about the project to speak up and ask questions. Postcard mailings were sent to neighbors within 300 feet of the entire Crossroads North site on October 5th or 6th, and the public hearing was published in the newspaper with the Belleville Independent. And so anybody who might have been interested might have tried to join us tonight, or they sometimes appear on Zoom. And I have nobody on Zoom, but just in case anybody does speak to the project, just want to put the image of the project up on the screen here. So we're talking about a conditional rezoning request to rezone with conditions this piece of property that you see here, north of Ecorse Road, west of Haggerty Road, which is 46.15 acres from MT, Industrial Transportation, to M2, General Industrial with conditions. And as the chair said, we'll get into the details of that request more at the new business item of tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Power. Make one more request. Anybody from the audience wish to speak regarding this item? And again, Director Power, nobody's on Zoom, correct?
Correct.
All right. Have a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
A motion by Commissioner Budd. Support?
Support.
All right. Support by Commissioner Jar. Any comments or discussion regarding the motion? As we have none, all in favor to close the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the public hearing is closed. That'll bring us up to new business item number 1 on the agenda, which is case number 22033, Crossroads Distribution Center North 6 LLC, rezoning with conditions request. I believe we have a presentation by you, Director Power, to start with.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. What I'd mostly like to do is give you a little bit of background on the site and turn the commentary over to our planning consultant from McKenna. But again, the request is specific to the Crossroads North Distribution Center site owned by Ashley Capital on the north side of Ecorse Road, west of Haggerty Road. And the project is a multi-year project that is being built out that started with the construction of 2 other buildings. One is a little over 200,000 square feet, and one is 660,000 square feet. And this will be the second 660,000 square foot building that will be the focus of this request. This is an area that under the township's master plan was master plan for industrial trucking or industrial transportation. The idea being that this was going to be an area where various distribution and logistics uses as well as manufacturing uses would come into the township. And this site has been carefully developed and utilities and services brought in over the course of its construction over the last 3 or 4 years. We talked about the scope of the specific rezoning request around Building 6. And here's a little bit more detail on a conceptual site plan for Building 6. You'll notice that it might look pretty familiar because the building footprint is really the same as what you saw when this project was originally reviewed and approved, and the proposed tenant of the building is going to have their own use requirements that may require some exterior work around the site. It is a lithium-ion battery manufacturer, and there's specifically a lithium iron phosphate battery manufacturer that is proposing to use the building, and they have certain equipment that they'll need to store outside, but otherwise the site will be, again, it will be reviewed later during an amended site plan review if necessary, but this is just to give you an idea of the layout of the site as we know it today. I included in your packet some descriptions of the industrial trucking and transportation and the heavy industrial planned land use categories in our zoning ordinance. Our zoning ordinance allows for rezonings that have criteria associated with them that are standard, that the Planning Commission reviews fairly often, including consistency with the master plan for what we'd call conventional rezonings. But then the zoning ordinance also has a section devoted to rezoning with conditions, where there might be a unique case where there's a project of particular value that has particular ability to cohere with its surroundings and meet the intent and goals and objectives of the master plan through a specific set of conditions offered in a conditional rezoning agreement. And that's what we're reviewing tonight. So a little bit of the master plan and zoning context for the proposed use. The process that you're reviewing tonight is just the conditional rezoning. Again, there may be an amended site plan review if necessary, and then there will be permitting of the proposed use at a later date as well. And then parallel to this review process, there's also some broader discussions, grant funding and incentives from the state and local level that are being considered. Road reconstruction of Haggerty Road is another very related project to this project. Those are not really the purview of the Planning Commission, but just want you to know some of the things that are happening in the background as well. But the purpose of tonight's meeting is really to just go over the merits of the rezoning with conditions agreement and to take any comments and feedback from the Planning Commission. And according to the recommendation of staff, there's a recommendation that the agreement is approvable and ready to be on the board's agenda for adoption at an upcoming date. So that's the summary, but I want to let our planning consultant with McKenna give the full report.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Director Power, members of the commission. Can you hear the microphone? I don't think it's. Can you hear me? Nope.
It's not very loud tonight. Maybe you should speak a little more into it.
It's going to go into my mouth at this rate, but I'll try. Okay, I'll try to be as loud as I can, which is plenty. So as Director Power summarized, the request before you tonight is for a conditional rezoning from an MT, Industrial Transportation District, to M2, which is General Industrial. And the reason for that is that MT, the Industrial Transportation District, does not permit automotive-based manufacturing facilities, whereas the M2 General Industrial does permit it. Conditional rezoning is not a very commonly used tool in planning and zoning, but when used correctly, it's an extremely effective tool to help a municipality get a use in that meets the master plan's goals and policies while not specifically being listed as a use in the district itself. We have reviewed the ordinance and the applicant's proposal based on the specific standards for conditional rezoning, and I shall summarize those in brief. Now, the use of the site currently is a distribution center. Ashley Crossroads North, not so long ago, received approval for 2 major distribution center buildings, which were Buildings 5 and Building 6. Building 5 is currently occupied by FedEx, and Building 6 is the subject of tonight's discussion. The properties all around it are pretty much zoned and used for industrial uses or industrial transportation uses, with a few isolated single-family non-conforming dwellings to its east. And although it is zoned single-family residential, there is an ITC corridor that's over 500 feet wide to the west. It is, however, zoned R1B, but there's no chance of anything being built within that corridor now or in the future. The specific standards based upon which the board has to consider every request for conditional rezoning, The first would be that it furthers the goals and objectives of the township master plan. Now, the master plan has got a specific goal and directive for what the M.T. industrial transportation should look like and what the M2 heavy industrial district should look at. Director Power put up the excerpt from the master plan, which clearly says that our master plan envisions no more industrial transportation within the township. Trucking is a very intensive use, and Van Buren Township has had more than its share of truck traffic, especially down the Ecorse-Haggerty Road corridor. At the time the distribution centers were approved, there was extensive discussion, interaction with Wayne County on improvements that need to be made and truck traffic that needs to be regulated in order to control the volume of trucks going in and out of the site. To that extent, an M2 use, which is mostly manufacturing based, is less intensive than an MT transportation use because you're not going to have as many truck trips as a typical distribution center building. The master plan clearly advocates for no additional industrial trucking beyond what it is currently zoned. So conversion of a trucking facility to something that is manufacturing is more suitable. At the time the zoning ordinance was originally written, all of the automotive uses were classified as heavy manufacturing because the process of manufacturing automotive components such as batteries, headlights, they involve the use of a lot of exterior chemicals. You had chemical baths. The process was not as clean and generated lots of toxins, fumes, so on and so forth. Over the past decade, the automotive industry has significantly evolved that the manufacturing processes are way more streamlined and way more reliant on technology, closed chamber processes, which actually takes out many of the adverse negative impacts that would typically be associated with stuff such as batteries and the chemicals that go into it. The second criteria is that the rezoning with conditions shall not authorize uses or developments that are not permitted in the district. Now, the M2 district does allow for heavy manufacturing and processing, and the ordinance specifically defines batteries as being considered as one of the heavy manufacturing process. The proposed lithium-ion battery manufacturing would be placed in this category, and so it would be considered as permitted within the district to which they are seeking conditional rezoning. Now, the next standard in the ordinance is pretty extensive in that it requires, if a property is conditionally rezoned, for the use that occupies such property to still comply with all of the zoning ordinance requirements for setbacks, dimensions, etc. In this case, we already have the building. The building was already reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission, and a distribution center was a special land use, so it did receive approval from the Board of Trustees also. So the building does at this time comply with all of the setbacks and the ordinance as it is written. As Director Power clarified, in the event the proposed occupant of the building needs to make any changes or revisions to the exterior of the building, and if those changes are deemed to be materially significant, it will be back before you for amended site plan approval, but we don't anticipate any of it will result in the need for variances or any such changes at this time. The next criteria is the proposed rezoning will result in integration of the land development with the characteristics of the property area. The property area is an industrial zone. It is surrounded, the Ecorse-Haggerty Road corridor is our prime industrial corridor with assorted light industrial, industrial trucking, transportation, so on and so forth uses. So to that extent, the proposed use is a good fit for the area. And the building that is going to be occupied by the applicant is located on the interior of the site. It's not a use that is right with frontage on Haggerty or on Ecorse Road. So it's going to be behind another major distribution center building, and as such, it's not going to be visible from the public rights of way. The next criteria is as compared to existing zoning and considering the site-specific conditions, it would be in the public interest to grant rezoning with conditions. So at this time, it is a distribution center building. We already have significant amount of distribution centers within the township. The proposed battery manufacturing entity is anticipated as a $1.6 billion investment, creating 2,000 plus jobs in the township. The manufacturing of batteries domestically will support the auto industry, which the Detroit metro area is heavily dependent on. And it's also likely to address some of the supply chain issues that came up during the pandemic. And as a result, having a battery manufacturer locally and within the country and the state also goes a long way towards reducing the dependency on any supply chain interruptions. So it is of definite benefit, not just to the township, but to the local region in general. The next condition, the next requirement is that the proposed conditions will not preclude future zoning and planning action by the municipality. There are no changes proposed at this time that would take away the township's rights to either consider a master plan amendment for the area or anything in the future. With regard to availability of public services in this area, the site was reviewed for all utilities as part of its site plan. It is understood that a manufacturing facility has got slightly more dependence on water and sanitary sewer than a distribution center building is. The applicant will be required to work with the township engineer to do the needful in order to meet the utility requirements at the site. One of the key points to remember about a conditional rezoning, the difference between a conditional rezoning and a regular rezoning is that the conditions have to be offered by the applicant only voluntarily. The township cannot impose or require any conditions. So all the township needs to do is evaluate whether the conditions that are being offered by the applicant are good enough to meet the intent of the ordinance and accept them as proposed or reject them. In this case, the applicant has offered a condition to include a prohibition on manufacture of automobiles and automobile bodies. That is one of the heaviest of all industrial uses within the township, as such designated only to the M2 area. And although they are conditionally rezoning themselves to M2, they are not going to ever manufacture automobiles in this area. Placing such a condition will actually safeguard the neighboring properties, including the single-family residential neighborhoods that are over 500 feet to the west, from any impacts that may result from a heavy manufacturing such as an auto body manufacturing unit. A conditional rezoning is not the same as a use variance. Use variances are illegal. We do not allow them in the township. A conditional rezoning, on the other hand, is an agreement between the township and the applicant that is legal and binding. Any violation of the terms of the agreement automatically negates the conditional rezoning and the property reverts back to its original zoning of MT. So the onus is on the applicant to meet all of the conditions and restrictions that they have voluntarily offered up to the township. And finally, it is the applicant's responsibility to secure any additional approvals that they may need. And as Director Power mentioned, should they need amended site plan approval for any changes to the site, they will be back before you. If it's minor enough, it can be administratively approved. Based upon our review of the proposal, at this time, we believe the applicant's request to rezone the subject site, which is Building 6 of Ashley Capital Crossroads North Development, from MT to M2 meets the standards of the ordinance 1 to 10 as listed in McKenna's October 18th, 2022 letter. So it's our recommendation that you recommend approval of the requested amendment to the zoning map to conditionally rezone this property to the Township Board of Trustees, and it would be subject to the condition that violation of any terms of the conditional rezoning agreement will automatically revert the zoning of the property back to the MT zoning and will render the conditional rezoning void. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Krishnan. Great. That brings us up to presentation by the applicant.
Chair, I'll mention we have Ken Bowen of Ashley Capital, Kyle Morton of Ashley Capital, and then Laura Ryan and Anthony Drum, and I'm one other person from.
Shazad Butt is the
Shazad Butt, okay.
COO for
Okay,
one.
very good. With
Tony is Vice President of Manufacturing. Hopefully they can answer any of the questions that I can't.
sounds good. Thank you.
So as he said, my name is Ken Bowen with Ashley Capital. I manage construction for Ashley Capital. I've been in front of the Planning Commission in Van Buren Township numerous times. A few new faces here, several older faces. It's good to be back. We're here tonight to request a conditional rezoning from MT to M2, as previously mentioned, but only to allow the manufacture of car batteries in our building number 6. All the other M2 uses that are allowable in M2 are going to continue to be restricted on the site. It's just for the batteries. I think there's a general feeling around that electric vehicles are the future of the automotive industry. But beyond that, I think that this particular operation moves the planet in a better direction with the move towards cleaner energy. To expound a little bit on Video's comment relative to the trucking operation, the building that we're building will have more than 110 dock doors on the building. The one operation will be using 16 of those dock doors. So the amount of trucks entering and exiting the site will be significantly less than we had previously anticipated. And you should see a real reduction in truck traffic versus what could have been at the building. I'm excited to be part of this project. I hope you are too. We're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Right, thank you so much. Do we have anybody else that would like to speak regarding this item?
Looks like we do.
Hello, I'm Shazad, COO of the company. Just to give you kind of a brief on the company. The world of, adoption of EVs, we believe, is impingent on really the extending of range. And we believe that range of EVs needs to be doubled to really enable true adoption of EVs. This company, Our Next Energy, has actually paved a path to do so. And we've developed technology that enables this. We've demonstrated that with a 752-mile run on a single charge in a Tesla with our technology. Our plan is not only to bring that technology to the market in North America, but do that vertically with vertical manufacturing in North America and in Michigan and in Van Buren. The plan is to bring powders to the facility and have packs exiting, battery packs exiting the facility. And so a truly vertical North American supply chain is what we plan to establish here. We plan to do that with materials that are safe, avoid nickel and cobalt in our chemistries, both from a standpoint of they being supply chain restricted, as well as the fact that those chemistries are not as safe as the approach that Our Next Energy is taking. So in terms of the overall stance of the company, the basics of the company, that's where we are. We plan on launching into production in 2024 with this plant and continuing to then increase our capacity going forward, both within Michigan. We would love to even expand to the next factory and use additional factories that Ashley Capital has and expand into those and have some rights to those properties as we go forward. So with that, again, any questions you may have, happy to answer those. We're very pleased to be in Van Buren Township and want to make it our home.
Thank you so much. Have any comments from anybody in the public this evening? Is there anybody on Zoom, Director Power?
No.
No. All right. Do we have any questions or comments from any of the commissioners?
I just had a question through the chair. What are your products? Are you going to be generating anything of hazardous materials? And then if so, how is the disposal of those materials going to be handled?
If you're, sorry, I should have warned you if you'd stay up with the microphone and let you get all the way back over there.
In terms of our manufacturing process, we are recycling hazardous materials that are both used in the manufacturing process as well as any waste that's generated. So, as Commissioner pointed out in her discussion, the manufacturing processes of batteries have evolved tremendously, and specifically with LFP technology, it is fully recyclable, and one of the benefits of that chemistry. So our plan is, from a processing standpoint, the key material that we use is a solvent that's used in casting and producing electrodes for the battery. the plant will include a solvent recycling system. And that system will use that to completely recycle and reuse, only topping off, any of those materials that wind up in the battery materials and go into batteries. But the plan is to recycle all of the NMP, we refer to that as NMP, as a solvent for electrode manufacturing. Any scrap that's generated, that's primarily copper scrap and aluminum scrap. The polymeric materials that are generated from casings, these are all recyclable materials, and the plan would be to recycle all of those. So there's no excessive hazardous waste, or per se, that we'll be generating.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Jar.
With NMP is the solvent that's in use?
Mhm.
I saw on the conceptual drawing that there were several tanks called out to store the NMP. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about what those tanks are planned to be. Are they underground or above ground? And specifically, what is NMP? Is it a flammable material? What is the solvent? If you could just answer that.
Sure. It is a solvent material, but more as it's more like diesel fuel than gasoline. So it's in that from a flammability standpoint, it's in that category. The tanks that you see are going to be outside. There's a recovery system. So the NMP, we mix that in with our slurries when we cast our electrodes, but then those electrodes are dried and the NMP is actually brought into vapor form. That's recaptured, and then that's condensed and then recycled and stored back in those same containers that are sitting outside. Now that system for recapturing and containing the NMP, there's a berm that's included around those. So there's storage vessels that have secondary storage that we've planned within the site so that in the event that there is any kind of a spill out there, that it's contained within the berm and does not contaminate any space.
Through the chair, we're indicating that we're going to be getting about 2,100 employees into Van Buren Township. Can you tell us, is that going to be a shift of employees, of these 2,100 employees? Are you going to be 24 hours making batteries?
Yeah. Tony, do you want to come and speak to that? VP of Manufacturing.
Good evening, I'm Tony Drum. To answer your question, 2,100 jobs is when the plant's fully capacitized with all the lines. So typically we run on a cell plant, you have to run it 24/7, so you're running all the way around the clock, 365. So you break up into 4-shift crews that alternate schedules during the week. They're 12-hour shifts, so typically if you use that, it's about 500 people per shift. So you would be moving about 1,000 people in and out every day. It's not 2,000 every day. It would be 1,000 per day, but the schedule would employ 2,100 to cover the 24/7 production schedule.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner.
And I understand as a conceptual site, the plans aren't done yet. Does the site have adequate parking for your shift?
Yeah, we work with Ashley Capital, and we've identified how many people that we would need per day, because it's not 2,100. And with the fact that there's over 110 docks, like Ken said, we're only going to be utilizing about 16 as an average. So the other side of the building will be unutilized for dock space. So the one side of the building will not have any docks being used. We can convert that into parking and make sure we have adequate parking for all the employees coming and going and visitors.
Yes, Commissioner Collins.
Yes. Getting back, I noticed you're doing research and development out in California.
Right.
Are you doing complete construction of the battery out there with your powders and your solvents as well?
Well, I think as an R&D, they have a small lab, and they do make batteries, not a large format battery like we're going to be doing here in Van Buren. They do more of a smaller type of battery, but they do assemble them. They do manufacture them at that, we call it a coin cell or a small pouch cell. And they do make them there, and then they do test them, cycle them, and then verify if the chemistries are working the way they've been designed to work.
I have a question for Ms. Krishnan. In the McKenna letter on item 7, you indicated that your recommendation is that increased traffic should be supported by the widening and reconstruction of Haggerty Road from Ecorse Road to Van Born, along with installation of a traffic signal subject to approval by Wayne County. My question is, who is the burden for the road widening that you're recommending? Who is the burden for that being placed upon financially?
Wayne County. Time plan of Wayne counties to widen and fix Haggerty Road. It's something the township has been trying to work on for a really long time. And I do believe in one of Wayne County's cycles of road improvements, Haggerty Road is going to have its day soon, at which time the road will be widened and will be fixed. We do not anticipate that the traffic generated from this site is, from the proposed use, is necessary to require a widening of Haggerty Road at this time or adding of lanes. That was more of a concern when you have truck traffics and semis trying to make the turns each time, and one truck makes it through the light and then all the cars are stuck behind it. That's not a concern with this use.
I have one final question, if I can ask Director Power. In the packet, which did contain a lot of great information on your manufacturing process, thank you, that was very educational. Director Power, the packet also included a terms of a conditional rezoning agreement, and I was wondering if you could very briefly present that in this meeting. I think it's only a page or two.
Sure.
I'd like to be able to make reference to it, having been presented.
Of course. Are you looking for the probably the terms and then the conditions subsequent to rezoning? Yes, sections 2 and 3.
Included a letter in the packet, the terms of the conditional rezoning
Oh, I see.
agreement.
In my letter. In my letter, there's findings, and then there's the literal agreement document.
The literal agreement document. Could you just briefly summarize the document?
Of course. I will take
I would,
this opportunity.
just pardon me, Director, but I would assume that in any motion, we'd want to reference that document. Yes. And in any motion, we want to be able to reference the document that's been presented.
Yes.
Thanks.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I would also suggest that any motion made on this should require that the document needs to be signed and executed before it goes to the Township Board of Trustees. I had a conditional rezoning on yesterday night's Board of Trustees meeting, and that is one of the requirements of conditional rezoning. You need to have a final copy of the document when it's before the board.
Noted. Thank you.
I will, if I could, just embellish a response about the road reconstruction as well, because it's a very important parallel project. All of the major roads in the township are county jurisdiction. So exactly as Ms. Krishnan said, it is a county road, and the funding ultimately comes from the county. I will say there's been a very extensive coordinated effort between Ashley Capital, who owns the property here and has the largest development stake in the property, Van Buren Township, Wayne County, and even the state of Michigan to come up with a formula for a coordinated water main replacement project and road reconstruction project. So it really has involved some design work and some investment by Ashley, as well as the primary source of the funding is Wayne County. And the township has agreed to a small amount of funding, if necessary, plus the water main replacement, which is going to be probably even more vital now with the manufacturing use. So those are all just parts of the road reconstruction aspect of the project, which we'll very much continue to push as this project moves forward. That being said, I would like to recite the terms of the conditional rezoning agreement. And primarily, I just encourage you to look by reference at the recitals from the document from the applicant. Let me make sure that I am referencing their their terms correctly. So this is a conditional rezoning agreement between Ashley Capital LLC of 2575 South Haggerty Road, Suite 500, Canton, Michigan, and Van Buren Township, the Chartered Township of Van Buren. The agreement will be final dated when it's executed and approved. But to just call out the specific terms of the conditional rezoning agreement, first, it is noted that the development project, with regard to the development project, the developer agrees to construct a 658,989 square foot industrial building and execute a minimum 10-year lease with a lithium-ion battery manufacturer, subject to conditions set forth in this agreement or the project. The rezoning, with respect to the rezoning, the township agrees to rezone the property from MT, Industrial Transportation, to M2, General Industrial, as set forth in the Charter Township of Van Buren Zoning Ordinance, Article 3, and allow the uses permitted by right and identified as permitted uses in Section 3.117. The following additional conditions shall apply to such rezoning. First, that the assembly and or manufacturing of automobiles or automobile bodies shall not be permitted. Second, that breweries, bump shops, metal buffing, plastering and polishing shops, lumber and planing mills, painting and sheet metal shops, undercoating and rust proofing shall not be permitted. Truck and railroad terminals shall not be permitted. And all M2 zoning districts special land uses identified in Section 3.117C of the zoning ordinance shall not be permitted. Conditions subsequent to the rezoning. If any of the following events occur, then this agreement shall be null and void, and the zoning of the property shall revert to the MT Industrial Transportation zoning classification. First, that the owner's failure or inability to provide the township with evidence that the owner has executed a minimum 10-year lease with a lithium-ion battery manufacturer within 3 months from the date in which the Township Board of Trustees approves the agreement. The developer fails to commence any necessary construction of the project within 6 months from the date in which the Township Board of Trustees approves this agreement. Third, that the owner ceases to lease the property to a lithium-ion battery manufacturer. Fourth, that the developer fails to comply with any of the provisions set forth in Section 2 of this agreement. And finally, that a court of law makes a determination that the developer has violated the terms of this agreement.
I think that's sufficient. And if I may, Mr. Chair, those, if you'd ask the applicant, that's the conditions, right? Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Yes, Commissioner Cullen.
For Vidya, you made comments somewhere along the way in the paperwork about an access to Haggerty Road. Is there going to be an access road put in from that to Haggerty for traffic, or is it all going to be off of E-Course Road?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Thank you. I saw that and I was trying to figure out where in the plan it was.
The access to Haggerty came as a part of Ashley's request to rezone a bunch of tiny little parcels, which was before you a few months ago.
Yes.
It's not part of this project or has got anything to do with this.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments from any of the commissioners? I noticed we had somebody come in a little bit late. Just want to check one more time with the public. Anybody has anything to say regarding this agenda item? No? All right. Is the board ready to take action on this?
I would move that the Planning Commission recommend approval to the Township Board of Trustees for the requested amendment to the zoning ordinance and map made by the applicant, Crossroads Distribution Center North 6 LLC, to rezone the property described as parcel ID 83-00899-002-706, otherwise known as the Ashley Crossroads North Building 6 site, which is located at 42060 E-Course Road, from MT Industrial Transportation to M2 General Industrial with conditions, based on the Planning Commission's finding that the requirements and standards of Section 12.507E, subsections 1 through 10, have been met, and on the analysis and subject to all of the conditions detailed in the letter from staff dated October 20th, 2022, and the McKenna letter dated October 18th, 2022, and subject to the terms of a signed and executed conditional rezoning agreement presented by staff tonight, October 26th, 2022. I look for support on this motion from my fellow commissioners.
All right, we got a motion by Commissioner Jar, support by Commissioner Cullen. Do we have any comments or discussion regarding the motion? Seeing as we have none, can I have a roll call, please?
Medina Atchison,
Yes.
Callie Barr,
Yes.
Bernie Grant,
Yes.
Sherry Budd,
Yes.
Brian Cullen,
Yes.
Jeff Jar,
Yes.
Brian Kelly.
The motion's approved. So thank you so much for coming this evening. Can't wait to see the project.
I look forward to having a positive impact on Van Buren Township.
Thank you.
Now the advertisements are true.
Have a great evening.
I think some of those were answered, and then as we move through the process, I'll make sure to get whatever information you have to our commissioners. So, yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Have a great night. So we are up to new business item number 2 on the revised agenda, which is case number 22-041, Lawrence Duty, 42482 North Cumberland Drive, Country Walk Phase 3 Site Plan Amendment. Director Power?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. For you on this revised agenda, this new item that was submitted yesterday, and thank you for being adaptive to the revised agenda, is a request to allow one new architectural model in an existing subdivision development. These types of requests come before you occasionally. The basic premise of this type of request is that with our planned residential development neighborhoods, which are often also site condominium neighborhoods, there's a specific set of architectural models that come in with the initial approval of a project. If a specific builder comes in with a different model that they'd like to propose, then the Planning Commission has to consider an amendment to that site plan for the overall project. So it is staff's responsibility to verify that relevant terms of the project's PRD agreement and the zoning ordinance are addressed as part of this request. So I'll provide some background in that regard. The applicant, Lawrence Duty, is requesting an amendment to the Country Walk Phase 3 site plan to allow one new model architectural elevation to be built in the subdivision. This is a lot at 42482 North Cumberland Drive specifically. He's not looking to build anywhere else in the subdivision. And in fact, that subdivision is all but built out. This is just a existing lot that had a foundation constructed. It was covered up, and they did not proceed with that construction. And so Mr. Duty has come in and provided the engineering basis for being able to pick up where that project left off and propose his elevation here. So we're reviewing the engineering aspect of the site as well as the architectural aspect. The Planning Commission's role is just to review the architecture. So this Country Walk development has an original PRD agreement that was approved in 2002, amended in 2005, and then after an expiration, there was a memorandum of understanding that was approved in 2015 that laid out the terms of continued development. The Country Walk Homeowners Association and Blue Country Walk made the agreement with the township, and now that's at the terms for continued development in the subdivision. So based on the MOU, the original PRD agreements, and the zoning ordinance, and specifically section 5115 of our zoning ordinance, there are standards that have to be met for any given architectural model. The first set of comments on this is regarding the site plan. In the Country Walk development, there's a required front and rear yard setback of 25 feet, a required side yard setback of 10 feet, and the lot sizes can vary in width from 61 feet to 75 feet, and in depth from 120 to 125 feet. This model is about 40 feet by 55 foot 3 inches. It will fit within those confines. The floor area of this unit exceeds 2,000 square feet, which is important because the required minimum floor area for Country Walk is 1,800 square feet. With regard to the facade elevations in the PRD specifically for Country Walk, there's a requirement that in two adjacent properties, or in adjacent properties, 3 lots and the parcels across the street and adjacent to the site, there need to be a roof pitch variation of varying roof pitches in different aspects of the building, as well as location of major design features relative to the main mass being differentiated between the units. Staff has verified that these criteria have been met. This is a unique architectural model. It's got different placement of the windows and a different roof structure than the neighboring properties that are all built out. So those requirements have been met. Building materials is also an important aspect of the review. There's a requirement in the PRD agreement and the zoning ordinance that each facade has a minimum of 50% brick, and this elevation has over 1,300 square feet of brick and exceeds the 50% requirement. And then lastly, in the PRD agreement, there are preset units that have to have side entry garages. This was not one of those units, so it's exempt from this requirement. You have here the drawing of the front facade, kind of the basic look of how this building will look from the front. This has been submitted. It's a scaled drawing from Mr. Duty. And we recommend that this model is approved subject to approval by Country Walk Phase 3's Homeowners Association, which I understand that Mr. Duty has been working closely to obtain that approval. So of course we'll have to get their approval before we move forward with any permitting. But I do recommend that the Planning Commission conditionally approve this request. I have Lawrence here tonight, Mr. Duty, if he'd like to say anything else, but those are my comments.
Thank you, Director Power. Mr. Duty, would you like to say anything regarding the request? Or? Okay, thank you so much. Do we have anybody else here this evening that would like to speak regarding this agenda item? Yes. Oh, did I skip past Ms. Krishnan? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
No. I just have a quick question for Director Power. Dan, the elevation that was up here, there was a smaller elevation over there. Were they supposed to be the same?
That was actually an image of an original plan that was submitted for the building that never got constructed. So I don't have any record of that model being approved or who designed it. It's a little bit...
Because those two drawings were different. The little one is different than the big one, so I wasn't sure which elevation they're seeking approval for.
That's right. They're seeking approval for the large one. The small one was an excerpt from our archives of what the original building plans showed for that site. It's similar, but it's not exactly the same. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Krishnan. I'm sorry I didn't see you.
Just wait.
Yeah.
Good evening, Planning Commission.
Evening.
I am Don Boynton Jr. I am the president of Country Walk 3 Homeowners Association. In regards to 42482 North Cumberland Drive, we are definitely happy that someone is finally going to build a home. The Homeowners Association will not stand in the way of any development of the home at this location. As far as the architectural designs, what I have seen this evening is the most that we have seen, and this information will be distributed amongst our board, definitely after this evening. So that is roughly all that I have to say at this time. I'm just as much as mute on the position as Mr. Duty is. I don't have a whole lot to say other than this information will be taken back to the board. However, there is still some other information that we are looking for, such as colors of the brick. I know that the original developer had about 4 or 5 different colors of brick and trim designs, but there are other design features as well. We have shutters, or yeah, I guess they're called shutters, outside of the windows. The windows have a certain design in the front of the home that's not on the rest of the home as well. There's brick all the way around. There are just a few things that we would like to see. The vinyl siding, will it all be horizontal? Will it be vertical? If so, how wide will it be? Will it be partially horizontal and partially vertical, or one section vertical? We're looking for actual architectural features in the home. And once we see those, everything's pretty much good.
All right. Thank you so much. Do you have Mr. Duty's contact information so we can get a hold of the board, or?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for coming this evening.
Sure thing.
Yes.
I have a question for the homeowner president.
Yes, Mr. Jar.
Are you in favor of us recommending this this architectural style at this time? Or would you rather us delay that until we see a more detailed architectural drawing?
I would prefer that whatever work that he can do, he can go ahead and do. I don't want to slow down anything, don't want to impede anything. However, as far as a full approval, we would need to see what the home is going to look like.
Before your association would approve the elevation?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. We're pretty much in step with the Planning Commission. We're not going to go ahead of you, but is what he would show to you is pretty much exactly what we would expect to see as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Questions, Commissioner?
No, sir.
Okay. Chairman?
I have no other questions for you either. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions, comments from any of the commissioners this evening?
For Mr. Duty, do you have an idea of your brick color or your siding color types that you are going to use at this point?
If you could come up, Mr. Duty, if you could come up to the microphone too.
And then identify yourself, please, so they can.
Owner. Yeah, I'm in the process of selecting that, but I had submitted a lot of the items as you have to the homeowner association. Maybe it didn't reach your desk as of yet because I submitted it to Ms. Harris. So I'm in the process of choosing those colors, but I'd still like to proceed forward because we got the weather coming in, and probably take me a week to gather all that. But in the meantime, I would like to proceed forward to at least capping it off and securing the structure, until I get that done.
Okay, thank you so much. Do you have any other questions, Commissioner Cullen?
No.
No?
I have one very brief question for any of the commissioners or Director Power. Do we have anything at the Van Buren Township zoning level that requires us to see a material sample for an architectural approval in this subdivision? Or can we go without that?
In the past, I think there have been with some of the builders, they'll bring in a whole package.
Palette,
But
yes.
I will look and see about what the requirements are under section 5.115, but I don't think there is anything specific to colors. Yeah, I think and sometimes those kinds of terms are laid out in the PRD agreement.
Okay.
So that would be what is also the obligation of the HOA to make sure they're comfortable with. But I don't think there is anything regarding colors in in our zoning ordinance.
Right. I think our ordinance only specifies how much brick, how much siding and all can be there. We don't specify the colors. That is actually enumerated out in the PUD agreement and whatever is there in their main master deed itself. We don't look at the colors.
So just to clarify for this evening, Director Power, the thought process is that if we were to take action and approve the request, nothing would be issued until the HOA and the developer have come to an understanding of what the colors and everything would be.
Correct. There would be no permits issued until that happens. I will mention one change just to acknowledge it. That one of the later changes, which might explain some of the late submittals too, is that Mr. Duty did add brick to the rear facade, which not all of the buildings have that, but he added it to the lower level of the rear facade in the last 2 days, I want to say. So that's one of the later submittals. Should help to improve the facade.
All right. Do you have any other questions from any of the commissioners? Are we ready to take action on this agenda item?
The honor is apparently mine. Mr. Chair, if I may, I would
Commissioner
move
Dunner.
that the Planning Commission grant the applicant Lawrence Duty an amendment to the approved Country Walk Phase 3 site plan to allow one new model architectural elevation to be built in the subdivision at the site located at 42482 North Cumberland Drive, based on the analysis and subject to the conditions detailed in the letter of staff dated 25 October 2022, specifically noting that the proposed unit is subject to approval by the Country Walk 3 Homeowners Association.
Thank you. Do we have support for the motion?
Support.
Motion by Commissioner Jar, support by Commissioner Barr. Do we have any comments or discussion regarding the motion? No? Can we have a roll call, please?
Sherry Budd,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Callie Barr,
Yes.
Medina Atchison,
Yes.
Brian Cullen,
Yes.
Jeff Jar,
Yes.
Brian Kelly.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for coming in this evening. You've got your approval, so just, if you can work with the HOA to get them the information that they need. All right. Thank you so much for coming in. We are now up to item number 3, the revised item number 3 on our agenda, zoning ordinance discussions, side entry garage, building separation requirements for residential developments. I think this is for you, correct, Director Power?
Yes. Planning Commissioners, this is a topic that has been given a lot of thought by all of you, and I appreciate all of the thought that has gone into it. And I'll say that what you have in front of you tonight is a detail-oriented set of amendments that tries to capture a lot of different things. So there may still be plenty of room for discussion and kind of revisiting some of the detail, addressing some key items to move forward with or to reconsider, and then considering whether to schedule a hearing or to give this some additional thought. I will just summarize what I put in my memo for the review tonight, and then Ms. Christian drafted the ordinance amendments that are in detail before you tonight, and she can speak to those as well. But I'll give some basis for the ordinance that's been developed and which I did at the last meeting, so I'll try not to belabor any old points. But there's some new feedback I'd like to give, or new perspective I'd like to give based on some of the conversations I've had with the planning commissioners. And I just want to acknowledge where the different viewpoints come from and what some of the concern areas are, and give you some basis for how to move forward or make a decision. So in my report, I mentioned that there are factors driving this discussion, of course. We did mention there is specific development interest from at least one property that we know would be affected by this. But additionally, we do have findings from the master plan. We also have some regional and comparison community context that guided some of the ordinance development that we have here. At the last meeting where we talked about this in September, we did ask for a concept of the proposed development at Tyler Road and Morton Taylor Road. This is a very small view, and I do apologize for the fine grain, but I did want to provide this information. I did talk to Pulte Homes, who has this project in queue. They've applied for this project. This is the specific development project that we discussed previously. So this is the proposed project at Morton Taylor and Tyler Road, about 30 acres. If you look at the image on the left there, that's the original approved plan, which had about 2/3 of the site be planned as multifamily attached units. And those were going to be 126 units for a density of about 4.4 units per acre. And then a balance of the site in the southeast corner that would be small commercial. To compare that to the conceptual plan that you see here, you're looking at home models that look something like what you see in the pictures there, with 88 housing units at a 3.1 unit per acre gross density. So that's just the concept of what's being proposed there. And of course, the reason that it's part of this discussion is that there are aspects of our current zoning that impact the layout of that project, specifically the side entry garage issue and the separation issue that we've mentioned previously. These units would not be 20 feet apart, or the buildings would not be 20 feet apart. And the side entry garages are not part of the concept here that are being considered. But some additional architectural embellishments have been tentatively agreed to by the builder. In addition to a specific site like that, we also zoomed back out and looked at some of the findings from the master plan. We did have public input that suggested that residents were in favor of more single-family housing. They were in favor of moderately priced single-family housing and maybe to some degree what you'd call affordable housing. Not so much in favor of more attached multifamily units that are, other than senior housing is kind of special, it's kind of unique, but multifamily in and of itself is not something that was favored heavily in the master plan. So what this led to was some specific feedback from the master plan. There was an overarching goal for residential to provide an adequate supply of housing that meets the needs of new and existing township residents, is responsive to changing generational preferences, allows residents to age in place, add value to the community, and achieves a high standard of excellence in aesthetics and design. When you look at specific objectives related to that goal, there are objectives regarding the ongoing maintenance and improvement of existing residential areas, encouraging the development of new housing formats, and making sure that density of housing is responsive to the area that the development is in. And specifically, the master plan calls out that the south and extreme east portions of the township, so south of that Hull and Sumter Road area that we talked about recently, as well as over by Hannon Road, those are areas where you'd see the very high acreage residential as opposed to maybe in the north end of the township. We had specific recommendations as far as revisions to the zoning ordinance that came out of the master plan. One that struck out in terms of this effort is the need to make new incentives and standards for infill housing and neighborhood investment should be developed for single-family residential districts corresponding to their respective densities. So we have areas that are zoned and planned residentially that maybe already have utilities, looking for new ways to incentivize development in those areas. We also talk about strategies for affordable housing, accessory dwelling units, and adaptive reuse. And I should say the Sumter Road Corridor Plan addressed some of these things when we started talking about ADUs and those kinds of things. But that just gives a overall view. I'll say that the efforts that we're undertaking now are not going to resolve. I don't think this discussion is meant to resolve all of those things, but it certainly can address a part of those. The master plan also called out the future land use of the township, and it's worth noting that the areas kind of in the yellow and orange here are the single family and low density and medium density housing, as opposed to what's called rural residential, which is the very low density 1 acre, 1 unit per acre lots or lower density. So most of the township, as far as residential growth, is planned for 1.75 to 5 units per acre, as opposed to 1 unit per acre. But at the same time, it's really important to acknowledge we are a township that's been historically more a place where people viewed as having rural character. It is really important to people who move here to have that kind of aesthetic. And I think some of the reasoning behind the original ordinance that called for a 20-foot separation probably responded to kind of an stately aesthetic of housing that could be spread more apart and have some aesthetic appeal. So it's certainly worth acknowledging that when we look at changing that at all. We did, in one of the earlier memos, Ms. Christian put together some reference data from some other communities, finding that Canton Township, Ypsilanti Township, Lyon Township, Plymouth Township, Pittsfield Township, and the city of Novi. Within those examples, there were no other communities that had these separation requirements. Didn't expand the net of study beyond those, but that was a pretty good initial pool of data for some comparison communities. I won't go through all of these, but there are about 8 properties that are 40 acres or greater that could be planned residential developments that would be affected by the separation ordinance. But most of these are high acreage properties in the south portion of the township that are rural residential plans. So you probably wouldn't have a development that comes in, especially since some of these are areas without even the sanitary utilities where you'd have this type of format. So you might think of a couple of these as being most prime for this type of development. Many of these are farmed properties or large rural residential properties in the south portion of the township. It might be actually 7 because the Wayne County Community College property is listed in 7 and 8. So there's a number of properties that would be subject to these ordinance amendments. Plus, if there are properties such as the one at Morton Taylor and Tyler Road that are under 40 acres but may meet the criteria for modifications from the 40-acre requirement, a small number of those properties as well. But I just wanted to give you an idea of the scope of this ordinance amendment, and then remember that some of these may not be PRDs or suitable for PRDs even within that scope. We talked about specific concerns, making sure that any kind of ordinance update we have is predictable and replicable for future planning commissioners, keeping in mind that rural character, reducing monotony and adding attractiveness to our neighborhoods. We talked about maybe some geographic considerations where, like I just said, the south portion of the township may be viewed differently than the northern portion. We don't want to necessarily tailor to a specific development plan. We want to account for other means of meeting master plan goals and objectives related to housing, such as the minimum floor area item. So that being said, I think we've tried to piece together an ordinance that is very detailed and has a lot of these concerns kind of built into it. But we've taken it pretty far down this road. I know there's a lot of good feedback. There are letters from Stephen Dark and Medina Atchison, Commissioner Atchison, in your packet. And there's been a lot of good feedback in the record of all these meetings. I tried to summarize them just now, but I know there's a lot more detail to them in terms of what people have said or what people have on their minds. So I encourage you to continue your discussion. But one thing I will say is there's a table in your packet that might help to guide your discussion. You know, we've taken the side entry garage discussion pretty far, and I believe there's some consensus on that part of the ordinance in September. So we might say, you know, side entry garage language, are we good? Okay, then move on. And if we want to get into the discussion of the 20-foot dwelling separation, there's kind of a broad brush way you can look at that. Are we comfortable with any changes? Yes or no? If so, do we want to just remove the restriction altogether? Yes or no? And the no would be, we don't want to remove the restriction altogether, but we want to talk about some specific embellishments we can support. And that's where our latest ordinance has these all kind of built in, except I will say that I added, in addition to, and I'll summarize them, sort of a minimum separation distance among contiguous units, providing offsets among contiguous units, prohibiting fences and structures between units, having a lower elevation between units to facilitate drainage, prohibiting landscaping between the units, requiring construction easements between the units, and one additional benefit such as an open space amenity or an architectural embellishment. In addition to those, let us know, I guess, if you're looking for anything that specifies certain zoning or certain geographic elements to this ordinance that would focus it even more perhaps in the north portion of the township. And then I also have something in concept form that would allow there to be also modification on the floor areas, because a lot of the PRD agreements we're working off of did have modifications to the floor areas of units to allow more of an averaging rather than a per unit would be considered gross floor area requirement. So just codifying that and having some more flexibility to say, hey, some units could be smaller, some units could be larger for new projects. That's something you could consider having in the ordinance language. So again, support continuing discussion, don't support it. If you do support it, do you want to have just a straightforward removal of the restriction? My hunch is that maybe you don't. Maybe you want to talk about this and have some really specific requirements. But perhaps after tonight, there will be some consensus on moving toward a public hearing. The way the scheduling works, there's also a meeting in November before we could even have the hearing scheduled. So that might be one more opportunity to look at a more refined version of the ordinance at that point. But that's, I don't want your eyes to be glazed over. It's a long meeting anyway, so I'm going to turn it over to you all and get out of the way.
All right, thank you, Director Bauer. I think I'm going to try to use your cheat sheet. So we'll just start off with the one we've talked about with side entry garage language. Do we have any feelings one way or another on side entry garage language? Are we ready to look at it again? Are we ready to have it set for a public hearing? Or are we not wanting to look at it?
Maybe, Mr. Chair, you're asking about Director Power's proposed changes that we've reviewed several times, correct?
Thank you for clarifying, yes.
I am very happy with those changes. I feel like we could move forward with them. I think they're adequate. I think they protect side access garages without necessarily requiring them. I think that the changes address many of the unintended consequences that arose from what at the time seemed like a really great idea, but again, maybe led to extra concrete in the neighborhoods. Yeah, I'm happy with it, and I think going forward with it would be the right thing to do on side entry garages. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Any other comments? Commissioner Cullen.
The side entry garages, looking at them, I was one that, and I drove through Cobblestone today, or Countrywide today, and I hardly saw porches when I traveled in one direction, and when I traveled in the other direction, I saw small little porches and big white garage doors through everything. So I'm not against eliminating the side garage door, but I believe that when we put that ordinance together, it needs to be something to minimize that, because to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but for an architectural appearance, you're looking at what the front facade of the home provides. And I see a garage, I don't see a home. And so I would like to see that. And a lot of it was that the garage protruded so far forward from the porch that some people had some nice stuff on their porch, but you couldn't see it till you got by it. So where's the reasoning for the decoration? And also, if the porch is so small, and we've talked about people moving between each other and getting to know their neighbors and what have you, isn't the front porch where a lot of it was done at one time? And walking on the sidewalk, you're walking across the garage door, not a front porch. So that's my feelings.
I think Commissioner Cullen's concern was exactly the reason for why our proposed amendment says that the Planning Commission can grant a deviation from the 30% requirement, provided your garage, you nailed it. The reason why it looks like you're visiting garages with houses attached to it rather than the other way around, because the garages protrude so far forward. So that's why our ordinance amendment clearly says that you can still have front entry, but the front of your garage has to be 5 feet behind the front door. So instead of being this way, it's now going to be reversed. So the porch, however small it is, will now be the first feature you see, and the garage will be the secondary feature. So I think the proposed amendment actually fixes that existing issue that we have in our subdivisions. So that was in one of our discussions that came up, saying that, these garages are dominating the face, and I believe Commissioner Budd had also brought that up, saying, don't want to see the garages sticking so far forward. And
Right,
so,
but I mean, I think there is, excuse me, some reasonable give and take to where the garage could be maybe 4 foot in front of the house line, but not the whole 20 foot of the garage, so that
Sticking
all
up,
you're
right.
seeing is the garage. Because I do know, after walking through Victory Place out there, some of their garages are 4 or 5 feet, and that's not offensive.
right.
But those other ones where that whole stub nose is that garage, it's just not an attractive.
Yeah, I think it sort of casts a shadow over the whole front entrance
Right.
to the house itself,
Yeah.
because it's so far front. I think the ordinance, as proposed with its amendment, addresses that concern. When we have these front garages, the garage is no longer, even if we have front garages, the garage is not going to be the dominant feature of a house. So hopefully this will take care of that for the future also.
Wonderful. So, general consensus is we're ready for a public hearing? Yeah. Do you want us to take a vote on it, Director Power, or are you okay with us just asking to put it up for a public hearing?
Are you referring to just the side entry?
Just the side entry. I'm going to go right down the chart that you've created.
Sure.
You spent a lot of time putting it together, so I figured we might want to use it.
Do we, I mean, we aren't going to try to adopt it individually. I mean, you want to do a whole ordinance at one time, correct, or am I wrong?
That was the glazed look I gave the chair. Either way, but you could separate them if that's, I think we're ready to move forward on the side entry garage part. So yeah, perhaps I should have had a separate line under that.
So even if we don't do a public hearing, we can just not bring that up again for the next meeting.
That's right.
Needs
Offer-
further discussion.
For discussion,
So we
that's
can
right.
put yes,
Yes.
no further comments.
Right, yes.
Okay.
The table is not foolproof.
Suggestion, please.
Yes.
The building separation ordinance is before you for the 6th time. I think 6th time is a charm. So I think each iteration of the ordinance has fixed another tiny concern and brought it that much closer. I wasn't there at your last meeting, but I watched the YouTube video of all the discussions, and I got a clear idea that the Planning Commission wants to do something about it, but you're worried about leaving it open-ended so that this commission might make good decisions. You don't know, 10 years down the road, if there are other commissioners, they might just not make the same kind of decisions, and you might end up with something completely undesirable. I think Commissioner Barr's concern was it's fine to give flexibility, but you need to have standards based upon which that flexibility is decided. So it's not just somebody coming up with a random saying, I'm not offended by it kind of thing. So based upon that, the new ordinance amendment that you see before you is something Dan and I we discussed every item. It still says that, you can have no more than so many homes in a straight line. Beyond a certain number, the walls have to be staggered so it doesn't create, when you're looking down the street, it's not like a straight wall. I did actually, a small correction to what Dan stated, I did put back into the ordinance that landscaping between two homes would be allowed, but the landscaping has to be low shrubs, no more than 2.5 feet tall. I think one of the comments the commissioner said is, you're looking between two houses, it's going to be all bare, bare, bare. So we can have seasonal flowers, you can have daylilies, you can have the bushes that are ornamental, decorative, and they still won't impede walking in. You can always step over a little bush. So it will still allow for that landscaping. We made sure that we had positive drainage, so even the homes are closer, we learned from some of our fellow neighbors not to create problems down the road, which we can't fix. So we have asked for positive drainage. We do have the requirement that you don't put any fences, and when you do PUDs, it's part of the agreement itself. There will be a construction access easement between all properties, so that if I'm building a deck or a patio in the back, then there's no way but for that backhoe to go through between the two houses, and they'll fix whatever they rip up. So the ordinance before you tonight actually tries to address all of the individual concerns that you have brought to the best of our ability, that they all work with one another. I would, however, suggest, it would be my suggestion, that you do hold it, schedule it for a public hearing. You are not required to take a decision on the day you have a public hearing. Public hearing is merely a means of getting public input. You have discussed this over 6 meetings. So even if you schedule a public hearing, you can just get information back from the public that night and then give us direction to fix something else that maybe the public brings up that for some reason we have not anticipated. So scheduling a public hearing does not by any means pressurize you into taking the next step towards passing the ordinance on. You can always say, go back and fix it and bring it back to us because a valid concern was brought up.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Krishnan. All right, so who wants to start the conversation
On what one now, the 20-foot?
on the building setbacks, 20-foot dwelling separation language?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Jar.
if we are following Director Powers' check sheet,
I think the first question is, should there be no change, yes or no? And I would propose that that be the question we answer first, if that is amenable to the board.
All right. Let's bring it up. All right, so question 1, should we not change it? Should we leave it alone? Anybody want to speak regarding this item?
To be clear, you probably understand, but that means no change to the existing ordinance. The
Right.
restriction remains in place.
The ordinance will stay in place. We're not going to touch it.
Go ahead.
I mean, you might as well just, really what it comes down to is, the perception of density is higher than the actual density is going to be. I mean, if it remains the same, you have the same amount of area per lot, but everybody's just closer together, and I think that's the concern is, do we want to have a community where houses are only 10 feet apart and lined up, even though there's some architectural differences and it's sort of a bit of an experiment in our community since we don't have it, while others do. And the question is this something that's good for Van Buren Township as opposed to other communities? I mean, because we do have sort of that character of being a rural community to some degree. And, is that more important to the residents to maintain that? Or, are they good with, hey, let's just, if somebody owns a house already, I mean, and I saw the poll, I listened to the poll, and I think that, I would agree that most people want more single-family housing than attached housing, but I don't think they know that. I don't know if you ask the question, would you like your house to be 10 feet apart versus 20 feet apart? You might find that they'll say no. So maybe that's a question that, we would need to pose in an open discussion in a public hearing, that sort of thing, get some feedback, because I think that's the missing question.
Through the chair, that's
Yes,
okay.
Commissioner Brown.
I think if you go through Victoria Place that's on Morton Taylor and Ecorse Road, if you've driven through, especially the back section where they're still working, some of those are 10 foot apart, right, Dan?
Yeah.
They're 10 foot apart.
Is it Townsend Park?
Townsend Park, yeah, it
Townsend
was
Park.
Yeah.
Victoria Park Phase 1 and then became Townsend
Yeah.
Park, yeah.
Okay, so they're 10 foot apart. And some of them don't look too bad. I think some of them are a little tighter than that. But the folks that have put a cement walkway right up against the house, all the way back, it's question about how much drainage space there is, because now the other section, it looks different. And the ones on the one street, you'll notice when you go in, there's like 2 houses on the whole street that are single levels. The others are big houses built on this little tiny lot. And yet if you go into the beginning of that subdivision, where they have the bigger separations, to me that's a more pleasant look than all them other ones that are so tiny. They're still big houses.
What is, I don't know if you have it, what is the square footage minimum or maximum for something that would be in a planned development like this where they're 10 feet apart? I mean, it's you mentioned, I mean, you could big is a lot different than a medium-sized home too in that situation.
It depends on the underlying zoning district that the PRD
Right,
is going
so,
into.
I mean,
And I
what
think
would be sort
in
of
an
the
R1B, I think it's 1,500 square feet.
Yeah, it tiers up from 1,250 to 1,800.
And I think as you drive through there, you'll see some of them homes are much bigger than that.
So you could get an 1,800 10 feet apart.
Yeah, I will just add the premise of the first question is, if there is no change, there's no ability to deviate from the restriction. I think that's one thing. It's not mandating, of course, the 10 feet apart. It's just allowing there to be some flexibility.
So I think the way I'm looking at it is I think we need to change it on, it's just a matter of how much. We have no flexibility, no ability to do anything else, and we're stuck. That one line on the bottom of number 3, where it says, however, the minimum building separation requirements may not be modified. Even if we just did broad stroke addressing that, that gives us the ability to do something. If we have a developer come in and then we can start addressing it with the sound planning, design, principles, engineering, if somebody comes in, but if we don't even address that modification, we're still stuck where we're at. So a lot of that is coming from, I was on the fence about it to begin with before going to the planning conference, and it seems to be a lot of the shift is trying to narrow down and allow the builder to come to the board and present what is available in the community and what the community wants. And so one of the things I would like to see in here possibly is community outreach, like a lot of the developers are doing. So if you're going to be building next to Walden Woods, I would sure like to hear from the Walden Woods HOA, or that they've talked to them, or Country Walk, like we have someone here this evening. It should be a partnership between the communities that are all going to be affected by it. So, but if we don't have the ability to even address that as an option, then we are possibly missing out on something. I'm sitting here looking at multiple just different designs, communities, everything, and I go and look at them like, well, I don't like that one, I don't like that one, but then they're selling out and lots of people like them. And so I kind of sit at the position of, if it's something that the community wants, something that's available, we have amazing businesses coming to the area and we need housing. With this kind of limitation in here, we're stuck.
And I would agree with that. But on the flip side, especially in the southern part of the township, I don't know if I want someone coming in with a PRD on a 2-acre place and let's say, oh, I want them only 5 foot, I would like a variance of 5. Ooh, that definitely changes that whole concept.
Yeah, the whole, the whole southern area, I don't,
That would, I mean, that would never happen.
Yeah, it could.
How?
Because if it was something that could be changed and you had a PRD, it technically could.
Not if we had limitations,
Well,
not if we had open spaces where if they're separated, I'm not a builder, I'm not a developer, but I know when I see something that I like. And right now, we have been doing the same thing over and over and over for years. And when we talk about finding out what our community wants, we just, I mean, it took us an extended period of time to complete our master plan, but we obtained input from the community, and they asked for different housing options. They asked for smaller lots.
I don't think they asked for smaller lots.
They suggested?
Mm,
We didn't tell them
well,
what to ask for.
sorry, we're talking over each other.
Yeah.
We didn't ask them what they wanted. They told us. And it was then documented. That's how I remember it. We didn't ask them for a movie theater if they wanted one. They told us they wanted them. We didn't ask them, do you want more restaurants? They told us they wanted more restaurants. We didn't ask them what kind of housing they wanted. They just said that they wanted more and different. That's.
Sorry, Commissioner Bud was.
Yes.
No,
sure.
that's all right. I'm not going to argue the point.
No, my question on that would be, how was the question phrased? Did you give him the options? Was it an A, B, C, D, or was it a write-in option where they said, I prefer to have a smaller lot? I don't know, Medina. I wasn't there when you went through that. That's why I'm asking, how was the thing presented?
Go ahead, Commissioner Etchinson.
I just remember that we showed them pictures, I believe. You know, do you?
I remember it was a long time ago. I guess the way I'm looking at it is there was a lot of feedback. There's been a lot of changes. There's been a lot of items. But if we keep this one restriction on here, all of that's relevant because we don't have the ability or any flexibility as a board. So and so the idea would then be is if we do want to go forward with the ordinance, then what is a way to narrow it to make it where it would fit? Is that one of those things where we go, all right, no, to protect our southern portion of the township, like we were discussing with redoing Sumter Road corridor, and then just say, all right, we're only going to address things that are on the northern part of the community that are already built up, and then protect the southern end like we did with the Sumter Road corridor plan. And so we could start looking at some of those items of, okay, we're able to break those up, correct, Director Power?
I don't see any issue with doing that in the zoning ordinance. One slight wrinkle, if you remember the Sumter Road corridor plan, there is a portion of that particular area where there's a concept that was proposed that was favored in that plan that kind of mimicked what happened in the Rulo subdivision on the other side. And that would consolidate development around the corner of Hull and Sumter and allow more of an open space around that. Even so, I would guess, and I don't have the layout in front of me right now, but even those houses in Rulo subdivision, for that area, it's fairly condensed, but they're probably still mostly 20 feet apart. I think you could still make some limits like that, even in a case like that. Whereas in the northern portion, you'd be talking about even more density. So I think that's right. I don't think you'd be likely to see a lot of requests for these kinds of developments, especially where there's no sanitary sewer, for example. You're not going to be able to get septic fields for them. But that's one thing where you might incentivize it in the north versus the south to be consistent with what's in the master plan.
To the chair.
Yes.
I've had a couple pieces. People in the northern section are worried about being closed in. If we let everybody build that close, now we're going to open up these people that have the bigger lots, and they're being felt like they're being closed in on. And then can they continue to use their property that way when they got all that moving in on top of them?
Through the chair. Can I?
Yes, sorry, I looked over.
No,
realized
that's
that.
fine. Yeah. Just kind of thinking too about, just as part of this conversation, and I think Commissioner Grant had a good point, that I think when we look at housing options, what is missing is like, if we want more housing, but I think that was a fair point, that what wasn't asked is like, would you want a house 10 foot or 10 feet from your neighbor's house, in this sort of consolidated way? I think too, I've been trying to look at this sort of over the past week and looking at even just safety, as far as houses being very close together. When you have townhomes, you have a firewall. You don't have that when you have these houses. And I think there was, this is just anecdotal, but looking at sort of firefighters and blogs and some of the evidence that came out of Colorado, where they had these housing areas that they were kind of saying houses that were closer than 12 feet were really a fire hazard they were seeing. There was a lot of discussion about that. That's not, our fire people here would know more than what I'm looking at, but I think that's something to think about too. I appreciate though all the text that we read in the new one addressing those concerns too about drainage. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I think too, when we look at our master plan, we also have things like having high standards of excellence in design. I mean, I think that's something we can think about too. And when we look for more housing options, that can also be, and I know we've talked about this, like smaller footprint of a house. We can have smaller lots, but we can also just have smaller houses. And I also think too, it's really exciting. We have this new battery factory coming in that's going to bring more people and more jobs. And I think people will want to come here and they will want to build homes. And so I think we don't necessarily have to capitulate to something that we may not want, because I think this will be an area that people will want to build in.
Yes, Commissioner Jar.
So I think, first I'll just say that it's been a lot of discussion, and I know that, and I apologize because I know I've changed my position more than once on it, and I know that at one point in one meeting I told Ms. Krishnan that she had me. I was convinced on the multifamily units but no way I was gonna take a lot of convincing in order to flex on that for single family. And I know at the last meeting I was at when we discussed this, I sat here and I said, I don't know. I'm undecided. I really don't know. I think, having thought about it more though, that I've made a couple of realizations. One is that the question isn't whether, in my mind, whether or not a future resident or a current resident looking to move out of rental market wants to move into a house with a 10-foot separation. That's not the question that's on the table. The question that is on the table is, do we want the Planning Commission to have the flexibility to make those dimensional changes with regard to building separation on a case-by-case basis or not? And while I thought originally, looking at our PRD document, that section 606-207B, I thought, why would we have a whole section dedicated to building separation if it wasn't important? Or if the people writing the PRD ordinances didn't feel that it was important. And so I started looking, why is it there? Why is it there? And my answer is, I don't know why it's there. I can't figure it out. And in talking to people, other planners, informally at the recent MAP conference, they've indicated to us, or to me, that that restriction doesn't sound reasonable. You ought to have and he said, boy, you really ought to have language. What you really want is language in your ordinance that says you have to follow sound building and design principles. You have to do things that are state-of-the-art, best current practices. Best current practices can change, but boy, that's what you really want to have in your ordinance. And when I looked in there, I found it. It's actually in our ordinance right at the very beginning. It says that the only reason we're allowed to make dimensional variances with regard to setbacks is if they're being done in accordance with sound planning and design principles, if they're being done in a way that takes into consideration health and safety, that takes into consideration the character of the surrounding neighborhood. Now when I look at what we've been proposing, and to staff, great job, guys. I mean, really excellent, because you've hit all of the items that are the most common sound planning and design principles that we need to be aware of, that we have to abide by. At this point, I'm convinced that the right thing to do is to simply remove the restriction. Just drop it and leave the choice of making a dimensional variance with regard to building separation. Leave that up to the Planning Commission to make a recommendation and the Township Board of Trustees to validate our recommendation by moving forward with it, or saying, no, you guys didn't follow sound design planning principles.
So
So let me just say, I'll clarify. I am in favor of the next item on the list, simple removal of the restriction with no further edits.
So basically, the last line of B3, which is minimum building separation requirements may not be modified, gets struck out, so that on a PRD by PRD basis, you will have the ability to decide whether you want to grant a modification or not.
I think that's what the chairman said in his comments, and I think striking section 6207C, building separation, entirely. That one line in the 6207B3, and then since it's no longer referenced, 6207C, and allow the Planning Commission to make the building lot line separations on a case-by-case basis. It doesn't mean we're going to build large subdivisions with 5-foot separation. It doesn't mean we're going to let people build without adequate drainage. All of those are sound design principles. They're sound planning principles. And if there's one thing I've learned in this discussion, it's that, man, there's a lot of detail, but our staff understands it and leads us to it, and that we understand it and lead us to it. Do we need to code it out into the ordinance? I kind of don't think so. I think the most flexible thing would be to trust that as a commission, and remember, we're only making recommendations to the township board. Our township board members will have the wisdom to make the right decision on a property by property basis.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well,
That's it. I'm done.
Well, the only problem with that is the board does not approve housing for that.
I think they approve PRDs, don't
They
they?
do approve PRDs.
Yeah.
But my biggest concern now, and I guess it's even to what you said, it's not the people that are buying these houses that are telling me what the width. It is that developer. And if he wants, and for him, it's money.
Yeah, I agree.
So if he's got a 40-acre lot and he wants 88 houses, and we think he ought to have 8, who's going to draw the line? Because are we going to have every subdivision or every PRD? It's all money. They don't care about what I want. And if I'm out here and going to buy a house, I like that house. I wish I had 1.5 acres, but I don't, because that's what this PRD says. I'm not sure who's going to be drawing that line. And I agree that maybe 20 is too much, and maybe we take it out. But how are we going to safeguard that we don't have every PRD where the biggest concern, and you know it's going to come from the developer, and that's money?
If I could just respond to that very briefly, I'm with you on that, absolutely. And I know that is what's going to happen. People are going to come and want to put in those houses that close. If we were to strike that and give ourselves that flexibility, what's that expression, with great power comes great responsibility? We would have to start saying no to some of these. We'd lose that front-end filter. A developer who was only interested in building that type of housing, today, they don't talk to us. They won't even give us a chance to negotiate. They won't come because we have that clause. And if we take it out, we'll have a lot more people coming in front of us with plans that we may not like, and we may end up saying no to a lot of them. But I feel like maybe giving ourselves the flexibility and the opportunity to say no is okay.
And you're going to have to rely on the commission having the expertise to make those judgment calls.
I'll also add, after going to this MAP conference, that I think our educational requirements for our commissioners are a really good thing.
I have no problem with
and
that, but-
you know, we're pretty well trained and are familiar with that's why I say sound planning and design principles. Man, I think we know what they are, you know. And then other boards may not in the future, and they may not work out right. But I hope not. I hope we keep our educational
Well, you got to
requirements.
define sound planning. I mean, life safety is a big point, and I agree with the fire. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that getting the fire marshal involved is a big deal. But you're going to be obviously negotiating with them, and a big part of that is aesthetics too. So it's not just simply, I mean, if they go strictly by planning, you know, developers know what they're doing. I mean, they can drop out the aesthetics, you know, and argue all day long about the, you know, the technical part of it. So.
And one of the other things that was bothering me, that I thought might help deal with some of the money issue is trying to make sure we are better about presenting these things to the area that it's going. So if we have known that there's this idea that somebody's coming is interested in the corner of Morton Taylor and Tyler, then the developer better be talking to Walden and Charter Club and Andover and Robinson River Park, because that's who's going to be affected by it most. And so if we're not reaching out and making sure that these communities, and I'm not saying we need to have these big town hall meetings and then do all this stuff, but just reaching out to the subdivision board and saying, hey, we're looking at building here. Do you have any feedback on it? This is what we're doing. Then you start getting feedback that would then come before us and come before the board if it goes that far. And that's typically what I've seen happen when we have developments that are coming in. They like to go to the neighboring communities and say, hey, we're going to be new in the block. This is what we're thinking. Here's our designs. What do you like? What do you don't like? And then we start getting feedback more before it comes to us. So we may not even be.
I want to say, through the chair, I'm sorry, was somebody going to say something?
I'll speak after you.
I just want to say thank you, Jeff, for saying what you did. I agree wholeheartedly with everything Jeff said. I wrote a letter. I tried to, I could have made it longer, so I am very sorry to everybody. But thank you, Jeff, because I feel like you've captured what I've been trying to get across. And, you know, my subject line was it's more than 10 feet. It's a bigger impact, and I feel like our staff, I don't know if they're pushing, like reminding us of the master plan and what the master plan is suggesting, or we should be following it by law. Jeff and Brian have mentioned that, I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. They have said, you know, maybe we should take this out completely. And I agree with that completely, because if we want to be a premier community, we want high standards, we need to expose ourselves to more developers and have the button to say no and to not be afraid of using it. But right now, we're going to be doing the same thing over and over and over again, and we're not going to be nimble, we're not going to be trendy, we're not going to be exposed to more developers. And guess what? Everything's costing more. So if we're worried about whether the builder's going to build 10 feet apart or 20 feet apart, it's still going to cost a whole lot of money.
Or
And-
six.
I'm sorry.
Or six, if you remove it altogether, they can argue anything that makes sense, right?
No.
With sound.
I don't believe so. I'm sorry. I didn't mean no.
No, it's okay.
But
I mean, I don't
think
know. I'm
in
just
the
I'm asking the
ordinance, I
question.
think that there's a clause that says, at no point can you make the side setback less than 5 feet. So I think that's in the PRD
But
argument.
you're
So it
setting it at 5
means
feet,
it
basically.
means the closest the buildings could get together
You're
is
already
10
setting it
feet.
at 5
Yeah.
feet. Okay.
Yeah.
So
We
Sorry.
don't know what's out there unless these developers come in and tell us what is selling. Somebody said it, I don't know if it was Commissioner Cullen, but somebody said these developments are being developed in a lot of places with open areas, walking paths, amenities, and they're selling out. they're selling out. Somebody's buying them, and the developers keep developing them. But we haven't had that here. And we can't count something that didn't happen. The second thing I want to mention is I referenced it in my letter. Is a commercial developer or a person who's going to develop multi-homes or rentals going to go to Walden Wood and say, hi, I'm a developer. I can develop this acreage here on the corner of Tyler and Morton Taylor. I'd like your input. They're not going to come and knock on the door and ask Walden Wood what they want. They're going to build what they want, and they're not going to care what the neighbors have to say. And I prefer that we have a developer that will knock on their doors and accommodate them, but a commercial developer will not be knocking on their door to ask them what they want. And that gives me heartburn. So I'd like us to be nimble and flexible, but still hold our high standards.
Ms. Christian, sorry.
Very interesting discussion. So at this time, our PRD ordinance allows for the Planning Commission to grant a deviation, to make a recommendation on granting a deviation from just about every standard: front yard setback, side yard setback, building height, amount of brick. You have the ability to modify everything, but for some reason, the ordinance says building separation is not negotiable. So considering all the discussion and the Planning Commission's concern that if you adopt something, it shouldn't spread to the south side into our large lot areas and all, the simplest way to tackle it at this point of time is to just take out the last line of that clause, allow yourself. There are standards in the zoning ordinance that say when a PRD deviation is requested, what standards it must meet. So just like you have considered all the other PRDs when somebody has come before you to reduce the setback from 30 feet to 25 feet, the standards you applied, you're going to apply the same standards, and at that time you're going to ask for input from our fire marshal. You're going to ask for input from our township engineer, and you're going to dot all the I's, cross all the T's. If it meets it, you're going to be okay with it, or you're going to tell them don't like it. 20 feet is too much. Okay, 15 feet. We can live with 15 feet, no less than that. So you will have the ability to flex it. So my suggestion, sorry, Director Power, just a suggestion that at this point of time, strike out that last line that does not grant the flexibility. So even a project such as the one that Dan showed you where they are interested, by taking that clause out, you're giving that developer an opportunity to come before you and present their layout and get your feedback and see what you think of it. You can tell them, nah, we don't like this idea of 88 homes or the way you proposed it. So let them hear it from you and come back with something that is more palatable. Maybe that's what we do.
Through the chair,
Yes,
just
Director
to
Bauer.
build on to that, I think the recommendation would be to strike the last clause of 6.2073, but also 6.207B3, but then also 6.207C is where the requirement for 20 feet is reiterated. I think it requires both of those to be struck.
My read of it was that striking just the clause, the one sentence isn't enough, because then 6027B3, the entire paragraph on building separations would still apply.
It will still remain at 20 feet. If a developer wants to still meet the 20 feet, great. If he wants to seek a deviation from the 20 feet, by striking out that last line, we are allowing them the ability to do that. So
I understand.
I think 6.207B3 last line needs to be struck out. I'm not sure we need to strike out any else.
Because the building separation would then be the guideline that they would be required to take a deviation from, were we
Exactly.
to be flexible in that way.
Exactly. And right
That way
now
they
that
would
clause,
have the guideline.
right now that clause does not allow you to even think about it. So
I get it.
if at all you're having a public hearing, it would be for the garage door orientation and for strikeout of that one sentence from your PRD ordinance.
Like it.
I do also want to acknowledge the good conversation about reaching out to the neighbors, right? Community outreach. I think there's some good points to be made. Commissioner Atchison made a really good point that zoning is very specific, and if you are locating a commercial use on a commercial site, you're not going to expect that developer to go to all the neighboring property owners. However, I think there's a credence to the argument that with PRDs where you're requesting modification from some of the standards and you want to make sure you're meeting the intent to cohere with the surrounding area, presumably in exchange for having some leniency on some of the zoning requirements, I think it does make sense to encourage community outreach. I will say that the township, right before I started, and you all, I think, had a role in the adoption of a public participation plan, which to some extent we're trying to get larger projects more engaged in that process. So it might be something where we encourage, whether it's if you're developing somewhere where you don't have a lot of neighboring HOAs, maybe it's an open house here at Township Hall, or maybe if you do have a lot of HOAs, you go and introduce yourselves to all those neighboring groups. Whether that has to be codified in the zoning ordinance or not, you can consider that, but it's something that we should keep in mind as staff too, that we want to make sure that these larger projects, especially where they're seeking modifications, are going above and beyond the state statute required outreach efforts, because they will have a potentially large impact on those neighbors.
I think at least from the way I would look at it, I would not like to codify the go talk to your neighbor language. However, if they came to a meeting and said, by the way, I went and talked to this group, and this group, and like we had somebody that came before us with the condos where they had the board president show up and talked about how great they had been and looking forward to the project. That goes.
Cobblestone Creek, yeah.
Yeah,
And,
goes
and I
really
think
far.
Dan has done a great job of, there are a few other projects that will be coming before you. And in all of these projects at the staff meeting, Dan has been clear to the applicant to tell them, talk to your neighbors, let them know what you're planning. And if they have any concerns, try and address them. And the projects that are going to come before you, for the most part, the developers have all been pretty good about meeting with their neighbors. But yeah, I wouldn't put it in a code because sometimes don't want anybody coming near them. So.
Mr. Chair, do we have an HOA commission in the township, or a group that could maybe give us feedback that other HOAs have come up with when we need to be educated on a decision we're possibly making?
I believe it was started and attempted, did it?
Right, and he just never could get them all together. They would set meetings for them all to come, and it didn't happen. But Leanne has tried to get that off the ground a half a dozen different times, and they've had a problem.
Yeah, they've kind of spread out. I think the last meeting was quite some time ago, but there is a coalition of HOAs that was active more in last year. But it was kind of there's a variety of topics they address in those meetings.
It was just a thought along the lines of how do we get that feedback from, other PRD neighborhoods. That's all I was looking for. Just a thought. Thanks.
Well, yeah, and I mean, they even went so far as to go to the different ones and then tried to get them all together to meet here. It just couldn't get off the ground.
I hate to do what you. Really loud, but sorry.
Trying to get people to show up for their own HOA meeting is incredible enough. Trying to get multiple HOAs together, oh wow.
That worked.
Sorry.
Sorry, we've gotten.
They'll show up to complain.
There is and there isn't. Right now, from the last meeting, we're stuck on, believe it or not, drainage. Because drainage is a huge concern with a great deal of the HOAs. So to answer your question,
Water table in this area.
We have. Sorry.
to answer your question, is there one? Yes. Right now, we're kind of stuck. So we're not doing a whole lot of meeting. However, if you contact Dan Selman, he will put it on the agenda and we will discuss it and you will get feedback. least I can say to that.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure thing.
Sorry, is there additional,
No.
any other?
Comment of drainage, that's all.
Oh.
We were talking,
And drainage tends to be the hot topic.
So ask them, what's the separation?
yeah. Yeah.
Do we have any other comments, questions, anything from commissioners this evening?
Would you like to make a motion to set for public hearing, strike out of that particular line from your PRD ordinance and the side entry garage requirement? We can schedule a public hearing for that and at least move along with that. So by striking that out, you're giving an opportunity for that developer to actually appear before you and show you what they've got. Sorry, I'm hungry, so I'm not getting my words in properly.
Are we ready for a public hearing on this? Is somebody ready for a motion?
I just have a quick question. So striking the last sentence of, again, I know we've gone over this a million times, B3, the last sentence, but that still includes C1 and the added language there. Is that right? You have like at least 20 feet, except that the township board, upon recommendation from the planning commission, may modify this requirement based on sound planning and design principles. That's all still part of that.
Yeah, we are not going to add any new text. That portion, we are going to leave it as is, saying that they shall be located at least 20 feet from any other detached principal or auxiliary structure. If they don't want to meet it, they will come before you asking for a deviation.
And then, so then under that, in the blue,
Okay.
that's not, is that added?
Yes, all the blue underlined ones are all new text.
Right, so that's part of this or no? No.
Nothing. We are not touching any of, all the blues, all the underlines are gone.
Okay.
Just the strike through is going to be there. The one strike
Through for the existing ordinance.
Language, correct.
Not our edits, not the draft. Just strike it from the existing ordinance as it is currently written and ratified.
But to be clear, that does leave the statement that any detached single-family principal or accessory structure in a PRD shall be located at least 5 feet from any side lot line.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. That should be okay.
It's still subject to deviations once we take that clause out. They can
Yep.
still, and you can say absolutely not. So,
Okay.
I'd be in support of getting that public hearing on the table. I would also like to see the actual one line striked
Clean,
out,
yes,
cleaned
clean
up.
copy.
Just
Okay.
a clean copy. And again, I don't want to make light of the amount of work that staff did making these drafts. I feel really terrible that after all of that work, what we're thinking of doing is removing 2 lines, but I really think it was worth it. I really do. If the rest of the commissioners would be in favor of it, I would direct staff to schedule, I would make a motion to direct staff to schedule the public hearing.
Support.
Motion from Commissioner Jar, support from Commissioner Atchison. You have any comments or discussion regarding the motion? All in favor to schedule it for a public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, and we're going to schedule it for a public hearing. Great conversations, great discussions. This has been difficult topic and very educational. I learned quite a lot. So. All right.
Next item.
What happened?
So, we,
Isn't it amazing? You go back to a very simple answer.
we are up to general discussion on the agenda for this evening. So, do we have anything for general discussion?
There will be another meeting on November 9th. That'll probably be fairly busy. There's going to be one new senior housing development with attached senior housing condominium-style units off of Tyler Road, a new project, an amendment to a PRD, and then we have a break around Thanksgiving, and then we're back in December. So both those agendas in November, December should be pretty busy. But otherwise, just go vote.
Meeting on the 9th, is that the public hearing dealing with senior housing?
That's correct, yep.
Okay, because I saw that in the paper and I was concerned that.
Yep.
All right. Anybody else have anything for? Oh, yes, Commissioner Jar.
I know it's late, guys, but I know that we had a lot of work on this ordinance, and we did it all in session. And one of the things I think I learned from it is it would probably behoove us to break out into subcommittees for further discussion on ordinance, new ones, maybe not this one, we've already done this one, but for subcommittee work for any future ordinances, like I know there's some EV ordinance that we want to work on. There are other projects we want to work on, but I think subcommittees to get it hammered out would be a good thing for us as a whole, so that we don't all get fatigued from discussing them. It would be better if we hashed out the smaller details in smaller groups, would be my suggestion.
I like the suggestion. My other thought would be is if we do subcommittees, we could always rotate through where you do, so I think there's about 4 or 5 higher priority items coming up. So we could rotate so it kind of distributes around everybody, so that way it gets brought in, presented, and we can get out before 9 o'clock, hopefully, on some
On
evenings.
discussion nights.
Any other comments, any feedback, anybody opposed to that idea?
Mr. Chair, we did learn a lot at the MAP conference, but given the time of the evening, I'm happy to share my experience with anyone who wants to ask, but at this time, I don't want to put it up for general discussion, only to say that I went. It was the first one of those that I have been to as a planning commissioner. I felt I learned a lot, and thanks to the township for taking the time to send me up there for my education. I think it's important. So that's it. Thanks. I want to go home now.
Sorry. Commissioner Cullen, what did you think of Citizen Planner?
I thought it was a great experience. Gave some good insight to what's expected of a planning commission and being a member of the planning commission and the responsibilities that you have. So it was highly enlightening. It was well worth the trip up. And thanks to the township for that opportunity.
I've been very, very thankful that we got pushed to start looking at the training, because it helps so much when we start looking at some of these things. So, all right, no more discussion. I'll stop. Anybody else have anything for general discussion? Have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support.
After action support from Commissioner Jar. All in favor say aye. Aye. All right, have a great night, everybody.